It's July 26, 2018, and you're listening to the Beer Temple Insiders Roundtable.
Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again. Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again.
Hello, and welcome to the Beer Temple Insiders Roundtable. I'm your host, Chris Quinn, coming to you once again from Studio B of the Co-Prosperity Sphere. Thanks, as always, for the Co-Pro and Lumpen Radio for having us on again. Thanks especially to the fearless leader of Lumpen Radio, Mr. Logan Bay, and to producer Serge for coming in yet again to lock it down and nail the openings. Well done, Serge. And thanks to you guys out there for tuning in to 105.5 FM. If you are listening over an actual radio, I commend you for having one. And I'm probably in your car. People still have radios in their car, I guess. But if you're listening to one not in your car, I commend you. But even if you are in your car, there's a good chance you're listening via some sort of streaming radio app like TuneIn or the Lumpen Radio app. And if so, good on you for doing that. But if you are listening via podcast, which I think the majority of you guys are, thanks to you as well. Either way, if you enjoy the show, I like to mention it at the top of the show. I should probably do it at the end of the show when people are ready to not be listening anymore, to leave a review for the show wherever you guys listen to the show, or what's even better, word of mouth. So if you like it and you think this is a show that other people would like, let them know. Now, you may be thinking, if this is the first time, how do I know if I like it, and why would I refer to a friend? I haven't heard it yet. What is this show? I don't even know what it is. And I'm about to tell you what this show is. And for those of you who have been listening for 100-plus episodes, you know, you can skip forward 15 seconds or something because you've heard this 140-some-odd times. But anyway, the goal of the show is to open up a window into how the people making, selling, marketing, and facilitating the beer getting into your glass feel about the topics that are a part of their everyday lives. Many of my greatest beer experiences have been talking about beer while sharing beer with people whose opinions I respect and admire, and it's these experiences that I try to capture with this show, the Beer Temple Insiders Roundtable. So I'm going to introduce this week's guests. Before I do, I want to mention that the opinions of my guests are their own and only their own opinions, meaning not the opinions of any entity that they may be affiliated with or employed by or anything like that. For example, Lumpen Radio, not Lumpen Radio's opinion. If Lumpen Radio was able to have an opinion, it wouldn't be the opinions of these people coming on the show, I promise you. And same with the Beer Temple. Even though I am part of the Beer Temple, still not their formal opinion, I promise you, kind of. Anyway, I wouldn't say that if I didn't have to, but I do. So let me get to my guests. An exciting panel. I'm really looking forward to it. A lot of people we haven't seen in a while. One of which is not my first guest, but we have to go in order. You know, there are rules. You know, and we go in order of seniority. Seniority being how many times you've been on the show, and that is definitely you, Mr. Doug Velicky. How are you?
Doing great. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great. What's up? What's new?
Things are very busy at Revolution right now. Like everybody in the industry, I wear a couple different hats at work, and so this is like a slower time on the finance side of things, but I also oversee our communications, and so anything new we have coming out, just planning social media-wise, press release, depending on what what it's worthy of getting, and just figuring out how we're going to do it, making it unique. We have a ton of stuff coming up that we're getting ready to announce all at the same time. So we've been busy with that. I do oversee our beer, the creation of our beer labels, which kind of goes along with how we promote them.
Yeah. What's the sort of you're going to what? You're not going to announce it here, obviously. You're more than welcome to. But what sort of stuff are you going to announce?
The biggest one is that'll be first is on Tuesday. We're going to announce our Deepwood series, like what the lineup's going to be this year.
Nice.
So we made a big change last year into cans and did 8 different beers. So we're going to kind of tell everybody our intentions for this coming year.
You did 6 last year?
8.
You did 8 last year, and you're going to do 8 again. And it's going to be different. At least.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to be different, huh?
Yeah.
And they're not all going to have vanilla and maple in them, right?
Not all of them, no.
Okay, just most.
No, we got to save room for the Neapolitan ice cream and the pancake one.
Yes.
So.
Yes, those are going to be good.
Mm-hmm.
I can just imagine the razzles.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of which, I think our resident razzle expert is I think maybe the next senior most guest, potentially Mr. Dan Pichet. If you had to speculate on the razzle price of a Neapolitan and a pancake barrel aged Rev Stout, which do you think would razzle higher?
Yes.
Also, hello, how are you?
Good. It's good to see you, Chris. It's nice
Good
to be home.
see you too. Yeah.
It can't be high enough.
Can't be high enough. You always play coy.
If you have to ask Chris, you can't afford it.
Very true. Won't afford it. Can't afford it. Probably both are true. What's new with you, Mr. Dan Pichet?
It's nice to get a break from the Miami Heat, and it's also nice to spend some time back
The basketball
in Chicago.
team?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
they're
Big
insufferable.
Miami Heat fan. July, Miami. I feel bad for my wife and kids who were there, and I'm working very hard tonight. So I'll need a note at the end of the day. So
Very cool. Anything new with you, beer-wise?
Beer-wise,
What's the beer scene in Miami like these days?
hot.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's growing. It's there's a lot of newer spots opening up. Some bigger national players coming into the market, but also smaller, really creative and places that are trying to work, kind of the own premise model, right? So there's a new place opening called Beat Culture. They have a barbecue restaurant. They partnered up with a local food truck, and it's going to be their first physical presence, and they're going to be near just south of the Miami airport. And they're opening, I think, next month, actually, in August. So somewhere thereabout.
And are the Florida Weisses still really popular? I mean this in all seriousness. Are they still very popular down there?
They are, and it's
The super fruited. How would you describe that for someone who may not know what that style of beer is? It's a very unique style of beer.
Yeah, it almost doesn't look like beer. It's kind of some of those fruited beers I've seen up here, or I think Virginia, The Answer did them. Moore did one here. I don't even know if that is technically considered beer. I'm not smart enough in that realm, but in some ways it makes sense. I mean, it's very hot this time of year down there, or just in general, it's warmer, so you're looking for something that's a little more refreshing, I guess, if that's your thing. And very fruit forward. They have colors that are not resembling typical beers. Purples and pinks and oranges and
Very bright.
very bright colors and
A little tart.
little tart. And I feel like it's something that similar to a New England IPA circa a couple years ago, that the code's been cracked to a certain level, and they're not just found with one brewery or in one region, that you can get them everywhere in some form or fashion. So they're certainly spreading outside of Florida. So
Did you try the Grim beer that we had on at the beer temple yesterday?
did not, no.
I wanted to see if that would pass the Florida Vice.
my
test.
standards are quite high. So
Right, that's what I wanted to see. Like, does it taste like Gatorade or not? It's kind of the way I look at it.
I carry my own Gatorade packets with me, so I can treat it
Right.
in the glass. Yes.
Right. Oh, this isn't quite up to standard. Let me just.
I can easily fix this.
There you go.
Yeah.
I think I'm in the mood for red. Okay, let's go for that. Well, thanks for coming, and thanks for bringing all the
Thank you for having me.
the beers.
Sure.
You brought some killer stuff. I can't even imagine the razzle prices you paid for those beers. I shudder to
I
think.
promised I wouldn't tell. So
Yeah. My next guest, I'm not sure who's the senior most member at this point, so I'm just going to, I don't think either of my next guests have been on in probably, I don't know, close to a year, something like that. What's up, Drew? You can go next. You grab the microphone.
Sucker.
Mr. Drew Larson of Leader's Beverage.
This one's mine.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Outstanding.
What's new, man?
Besides the 13th letter of the Greek alphabet, new, I don't know why that's always stuck with me. My father said it to me when I went to college. Anyways, just been enjoying the industry. The summer's been crazy. I lost 2 managers, so I'm behind a computer instead of 6 hours a day, 30 minutes a day, and I'm on the street 10 hours a day. But in my world, that's good because I'd much rather be out cutting my hands than
I noticed on
typing.
your social media, that's kind of how, it's funny, that's how I kind of keep up with you now more than actually seeing you, but that's just how it goes. And I've noticed that you've been out doing things because I can tell when something excites you.
Yeah.
And you get excited by things that wouldn't excite most people in the beer world, let alone most people generally. But I do. You have a way to express genuine enthusiasm for finding a piece of plastic tubing clogged with mold or something like that. That
Oh
really
man, but
geeks
when
you.
it's like when it's crazy and it's just like this hasn't been, I've never seen this before. This is amazing. There is a new level of just
Neglect.
of neglect here
Yeah.
that like you got to share that with the world.
Yeah.
And it's like because that kind of neglect, it's not the neglect that excites me. It's the opportunity to show people that neglect so that you can equate it to how that is affecting somebody's business. So this neglect is driving your sales down and your revenue and your profitability. I'm like, so if you're cutting a corner, you're just basically taking your first step to closing. That's what cutting corners are to me. And when I see that stuff, it's just, I don't know, it's exciting. I like to tell people it's not hard to amuse me. It's just hard to impress me.
Okay.
So sometimes we find stuff that's just impressive.
Well, good. Thanks for finding some time to come back on. It's good to see you.
And I'll be back in September again.
Yeah. Well, I guess the cat's out of the bag.
Oh, sorry.
No, kidding. And my final guest is another guest that I'm excited to have back on, Mr. Keith Lemke of Keith Lemke now. And one of our, I think, per appearance, you garner the most positive positive feedback of any of our guests for one reason. I tend to think it's the Canadian accent.
I get my family to listen, so that really helps out.
That could be
Large
it,
family,
too.
yes.
Yeah.
Amish, that's the only time they listen to the radio.
Yeah. So that's cool that they do that. Is it one of those crank ones that doesn't use a battery?
It's a crystal radio made from, we learned to make them in Boy Scouts, and I brought it back to the farm, and man, I tell you, every Saturday night, they crank that sucker up like you can't believe.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, good for you. What's new with you other than your beautiful golden locks?
Shoulder
length
Thank
there.
God this is radio.
Yeah.
Let's see. I left Siebel Institute last January after 17 years.
Yeah.
And basically, it wasn't very voluntary. The doctor said to me, Mr. Lemke, you can't go back to work tomorrow because running full speed trying to keep up with a growing craft brewing industry over that time kind of took its toll. So in February, the day after my last day at Siebel Institute, at midnight, I boarded a plane for Thailand, spent a month in Thailand, then went for a month in Europe, and have traveled, spent 2.5 months in Australia. But more importantly, beer-wise, none of that was really beer-wise. Beer-wise, I am well on the way to completing writing a book of technical brewing for people who are at the basic to intermediate level. So I've gone through most of the textual matter, and I'm working on the graphics at this point. And hopefully we'll see this come to light sometime in the beginning of 2019.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, I've got congratulations on that. That's great. And
Thank
it sounds
you.
like you've had a very fun time and a decent excuse for not being on the show. I almost accept it. My question, and I'm sure what people want to know after hearing, all that awesome stuff that you just said is, will the picture of the author in the book, will you get a haircut before you get it taken?
That's a damned important question. I'm actually just letting it go full-blown Lonnie Anderson because somewhere between my hair length and my encroaching gynecomastia, I will actually look like her next year.
Okay.
But it will just be dependent. We've got an art director. I may just put a picture of a cat because everyone loves kitties.
Yeah. Okay, then.
I kind of feel like it should be a man bun.
I could be going for that, actually. But more a croissant than a bun, actually.
A man croissant.
Yeah. Wait.
I think you should do that.
Do you like my bilingualism there?
I
Oui.
do. Well, I mean,
We
you
Canadians.
You are Canadian. So
Two official languages.
Yeah.
It can be done.
yeah. You know what? I almost went down a path that I've decided not to go down. But welcome back, everybody. Let's get into it, and let's see if there's any beers you guys have had recently that have excited you, or any beers that you're about to have or about to announce in the coming Tuesday that you are excited about. So it can be something that you've already had, or something that you are excited to try or announce. We've changed it a little bit this week. Dan, anything?
Well, being this is the first time in Chicago in a few months, getting to try Chug Life from Mars was something I've heard about in more than one occasion on this show. So that's interesting. I was at the Voodoo Beer Festival in Pennsylvania.
For that, 20, how much was that beer?
Well, that's not the reason I
No,
went.
not
but
Razzle.
It's
Not
hard.
Razzle. What's the regular price? I know you think in Razzle.
I don't know where all this
Do
came
you think
from.
of
but
non-beer stuff in Razzle?
It's tough.
How much could I razzle this cooler for?
I'm sure there's a market for it. I
Sure,
have
okay.
2 young kids at home, so I don't get to focus as much of my effort on it. But it was $26. I think it might have actually been the most expensive at retail 4-pack of 16-ounce cans that I've seen.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there wasn't something more, but it
Is
certainly
that
was.
the unicorn farts or something
Yeah,
like that?
yeah. It was
Great.
reminiscent of
Premium name.
another logo that we've all seen here a few times. You know, what I was talking to you about, what I find so funny, so interesting about it is that was so expensive, and then you look at the beers coming out of their barrel program, and they're arguably some of the cheapest.
Famously
beers.
cheap, right?
Yeah, I mean, to a point where they kind of scratch your head on why they're priced at what they're at, considering where prices are at currently. I mean, you can look back a few years and it might be more in line historically, but that I just found was really perplexing, that you would have an IPA that's the most expensive in the country, and then you'd have really high-end barrel-aged stouts that are, cheap.
Yeah, in that echelon of,
I read it was 9 pounds per barrel, and when you hop at that rate, you lose so much beer that the price. Me and Mike Shalau are actually just doing a little back of the napkin math, and it's like it kind of checks out. Like nobody uses that much hops, like extremely wasteful, and like once you hit like 6, it's almost pointless. But you do lose a ton of beer, and then the net beer that you end up with winds up being worthy of that price.
Per ounce,
But
okay.
it doesn't make it worth doing. But it does. The math does kind of work.
You paid for the unicorn share, huh?
Exactly.
yeah, there you go.
Fart share.
What? Yeah, that's the fart share. How was the beer?
I didn't actually have it. At the
Razzled.
festival,
You had to razzle
I had to pay for the plane ticket for
Right.
myself and my family. So
Right. That beer's not going to razzle itself. I mean, that's a famous saying of yours.
well, it's gonna be a long 2 hours.
No, I'm kidding. All right, no more razzle for at least 5 minutes.
Yeah,
No, I'm kidding. It won't be 5 minutes. It'll be much less. No, why didn't you try it? Why didn't you try the beer?
I don't think at least that I saw, I didn't see them having it on.
Oh,
So it was a festival. So
I thought it wasn't for that
I didn't. No, I did not fly my family to Pennsylvania to go try the unicorn farts.
I'm
It was
sorry.
the beer festival. So some local breweries were there. Got to try a couple of their more storied barrel aged beers, which was interesting. Stuff that I haven't had a chance to try in the past, and
experience.
Outside of the 20, I mean, the shock of the $26 IPA, which I mean, in kind of your and Mike Schlau's calculations, making sense. It's a brewery that I always liked, and I like the fact they're an employee-owned brewery, which I think is pretty neat. And they've done that pretty successfully, and I actually like their business model a lot. And they have a production brewery, and they have the satellites that are kind of spread out across western Pennsylvania, and do a pretty good job of cultivating a local following. They're getting out of their home market. I even see some of their beers on the shelves in Florida. But they don't move the same way they probably do in western Pennsylvania. So it's interesting to see breweries starting to expand further, and then when you don't have the hometown support.
Isn't that funny how fast the cachet falls off for
Sure.
even these like super geeked about beers? It's I've noticed that too. Beers that you heard about people like traveling to get, trading for, and then they show up on the local shelves, and a week later, I mean, you get a pop, and then it's just nobody cares. It's scary in a way, but yeah.
Yeah, the market's changed. I mean, it's been 2 years since I moved from Chicago to Miami, and I kind of joke every time I come back into your shop, I'm stuck in a perpetual like summer 2016 time warp. That I see things on shelves, I'm impulsively like, wow, I can't believe that's there, and I can't believe that's there, and I can't believe that's there. And that's just how much things have changed in the Chicago
beer
scene and beer in general. And that's just the stuff that's hitting distro compared to the on-premise, which has changed considerably in 2 years.
My gosh.
And as the resident outsider on the Insiders Roundtable, in that I have absolutely nothing to do with the beer industry.
That's not entirely true.
Well, I mean, as a banker, right?
You funded. That sort of stuff.
You're right.
Yeah.
But in general, that I'm not day to day. That's not my job.
I would say breweries that you help fund expansions for would say you are very important to the beer industry.
But in general, like I find the business model so fascinating about it. As much as I enjoy consuming, and if you ask my doctor, over-consuming calorically. So
yes.
I find that as interesting as whatever the new hot beer or whatever on the market is, because at the end of the day,
most people, that's why they're into craft beers, for the intriguing business
sure,
models.
Absolutely. That's
not the business, but the business models specifically. I don't want to make any money. I'm just interested in the business models. So I've got a guy who's interested in the business models, a guy who's interested in finding mold in beer lines. And great, it's going to be awesome. Speaking of which, what beers have you seen lately that have been interesting to you, Drew? Ones with like chunks of like hair in them,
so
or
it's not so much that I'm excited about finding it. It's more like I'm excited when I find it because I get to show it to people.
Right.
Had an amazing Razzle Rattler. No, I'm just kidding.
Ooh, great.
I just wanted to get the word razzle out there.
Yeah.
Everybody else has used it.
Yeah. Thing.
To be honest, I just had the other day a bottle of FV13, which was an Allagash Cool Ship.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago. I've held on to it forever. It was one of my favorite beers of all time, and I opened that sucker up yesterday and drank that, and it just blew my mind again. So
That's cool.
I really love those kind of lightly funky beers. The other thing I've been on the search for this summer is the Perfect Helles, which is hard to find in the American market because everybody wants to crush it with American hops. And while those are great beers, a lot of them, I just want that perfect German Helles that's malt driven.
Who makes? Who do you think has some of your favorite Helleses? Let me start. Let me take a step back. What are some of the characteristics of the perfect Helles for you?
So to me, the perfect Helles, first of all, it has a balance that a lot of people don't understand. We talk about balance, we think, oh, this is a well-balanced beer. But when you have a well-made German beer, there is nothing that stands out. They all work together in this amazing flavor. So for me, a Helles has a very kind of malt-driven, and when I say malt, I'm talking about like a water cracker and maybe slightly toasted biscuit.
Yep.
So it's this kind of sweet cereal dust almost maltiness The hops are there, but you can't pick out a hop note. It's like it's definitely there. There's a crispness, but I'm not getting pine or flower or anything else from it because nothing is standing above anything else. It's just, and for me, that is a sessionable beer because nothing is overwhelming my palate, yet it's delicious. And when it's done right, it can be complex at the same time. Some of the best lagers I have on a regular basis come from Metropolitan. There's nobody, if anybody knows me or sees my social media feed in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, they'll know that Magnetron's one of my favorite beers of all time. I talk about it all the time. Here I am talking about it again. So that's kind of what I've been looking for. I know we're talking about some stuff tonight, like IPAs maybe.
So who's making some of your favorite Hellas's right now? Or you haven't found it? I've got some suggestions.
I would love suggestions. Honestly, I love the Schlenkerla Hellas, and they're coming out in cans
that's great,
now.
But it's smoked.
It's
not
coming out
smoked,
in cans,
but
and it's very light. The cans are out. Gorchfach actually is, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
I think you are.
That's actually, I think, one of the better made Hellas's.
I agree.
Because and
Three
crazy
Floyds.
enough for Three Floyds to not overhop a beer. Not that they overhop other beers. I just mean that they don't overhop it like a lot of Hellas's do. So I've always
Have
loved
you
Gorchfach.
had Crystal Lake Brewing's Beach Blonde Lager? It's called.
I have not.
It is. I think I'm not going to say definitively, but I think it would be in the running for the best Hellas in the state. If it's awesome. I think it won silver at the World Beer Cup.
Oh, phenomenal!
Yeah, it's really really nice. And they have a Kolsch out this summer too. That's really great from Crystal Lake.
Another
Brewing.
favorite. I will. I'll look for those guys.
Yeah. Look for that.
Crystal
I think you would enjoy it. Beach Blonde. It doesn't. It sounds like it's a blonde ale, but it's a Hellas. And Beach Blonde and very good.
I would say
recommend
that if you poured a blonde and a Hellas into 2 mugs, and you wouldn't know the difference from a distance or even potentially close up.
I'll go next because you're talking about some of your favorite beers. I brought 2 bottles of one of my favorite beers of all time that I recently refell in love with, which is Brasserie de la Seine's Terrace Bulba, which is a Belgian blonde ale that, when fresh, I think is one of the best beers in the world. 4.5%, wonderful balance of ester, light kind of a Belgian ester character, and herbal hops. It's a Belgian pale ale, I would definitely call it, and I highly recommend anyone out there to go out and get it. Make sure, I would say, keep it under 3 months. It can last a little bit of time, but you don't want it too much older than that. And I have 2 bottles in there that I'm going to be sharing with everyone here because I'm really excited about it. Who wants to go next?
I can go.
Doug?
I did a vertical with a buddy of mine of one of my favorite beers that's kind of you don't hear about as much, but Russian River Beatification.
Never heard of it.
Was kind of their one of the, it might be, if not one of the original kind of American tributes to
Lambic,
Belgian Lambic.
Yeah.
They even put, I think, on their website that they, were tipping their cat to Cantillon at the first time they brewed that.
Yeah, and they call it Sonambic, or they have a name for what they call it. Yeah,
but they bring it out. It's not every year. I think it's every year and a half approximately. So we drank a 2012, a 2015, and a 2017, and it doesn't age that great. The 2012 was decent. It was definitely muddy, but it definitely made me. The reason we opened it is they're coming out with the new one, and I've had these in my fridge for some of them 6 years, and I was just like, these need to go. It's time to drink these. Mm-hmm. And so rather than try to wait to get the new one, I was just like, let's drink these. Let's drink these old ones. And man, those new ones are beautiful, but they definitely got worse.
Now, do you think it was the age, or do you think the beer has gotten better, or both?
I think it was the age.
Okay.
The color, I have a picture of it I can show you. Was
it was getting
dark.
darker.
Yeah, it was very dark, and then the middle was clearly in between, and then fresher one that was from 2017 was still bright yellow and just looked perfect and tasted amazing.
Awesome.
So,
Keith, anything? Any Thai beers you've had? Or anything?
There are 2 Thai beers. I've had both.
Tiger?
Of them.
Is that one of them?
Well, you can get Tiger there. It's Chang and Singha. And
yeah.
both, because what I was doing for that 2 months, I walked 520 miles in 2 months, 260 of that in Thailand, and roughly 85 to 90 degree weather. So having sort of light, crisp, just enough bittering to it, Pilsner-style beers was a perfect thing. Thailand's just kind of getting their feet into the craft brewing water now. I believe it's still technically illegal to be a craft brewer in Thailand. Well, traveling, Australia's really coming along with their craft brewing scene. Their biggest limitation is taxation. A 30-pack of sort of faceless Pilsner-style beer would put you back about $40 American. A 6-pack of craft beer is 25 to 30. If it's a good quality, small production beer. So,
And that's just to take home. That's not to drink on premise.
that's just
though,
to
right?
take home. Typically, a pint would be probably $11 US for the equivalent of a 20-ounce pint. And that would be for something like Little Creatures. There are craft breweries that are owned by the large breweries.
Yeah.
If you find a place that does have true craft beer, you can expect that you'll pay a real premium for it. So a lot of people drink at home there. It was interesting to be part of the culture there because I've been there in Australia 4 times over the years, always talking with people about what the nature of the industry was. And they're totally jazzed down there. They've got so much energy about the amount of growth that you've seen in the Australian craft community. And they're now needing to wage battles, legal battles, in order to be able to get taxation reduced, to be able to build breweries in locations that aren't commercial industrial. The government there doesn't, local governments don't seem to understand that when you want to open a small brewery, it's not an industrial sort of place, but they still want to sequester them into what you would consider traditional commercial industrial grounds. It's good for the brewers in that the cost per square foot is minimal. And for them to build tasting rooms, they have almost no restrictions.
Right.
So what they're finding is especially around Melbourne and Sydney have pretty quickly growing craft brewing communities. I took a tour around Melbourne, and the guys out there are going, we're super happy about the fact that you see all the traffic around us. That's just people coming here. So there are, like many places across the U.S., and sort of small plots of land within London in their craft brewing community down by the Shard, by the public market. It's breweries going into odd cubbyhole locations, and they're creating
London
these
is
traffic
crazy
patterns.
that way, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see what happens when you put a brewery in out-of-the-way location, and suddenly that location becomes really cool. It's something we've seen in the U.S. a lot, primarily from economy. In Australia, it's by reality. But locally, sort of the stuff I've been most impressed with lately is just an old standby, and that's John Cutler's Hefeweizen at Peace. You go there for the lunchtime pizza, which is rational size that a single human being can actually finish it. And I found the golden combination of the lunch size white with Italian sausage, hot Doug's sausage, which is now on the permanent menu, and Jardinera, along with a 2 or 3 pints of Cutler Hefeweizen, one for each small piece, which just works mathematically very well
I don't
for me.
think it could work out any other way.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, cool. We've got some beers to try now. Serge, I think the people want to hear about other shows that Lumpen Radio has to offer. So I think we should probably do that, give the people what they want. It'll probably take 60 to 90 seconds or so. And then after that, we'll come back with more of the Beer Temple Insiders Roundtable. Welcome back to the Beer Temple Insiders Roundtable. I'm your host, Chris Quinn, and I am joined by my guests this week, Doug Valicki, Keith Lemke, Drew Larson, and Dan. How do you pronounce your last name? Because I get it wrong all the time.
Pichet.
Pichet. Okay, so I did have it right. Okay. Oh, no, I say Pichet, but it's Pichet. Got it. I knew I always get it wrong and had for like a year until you corrected me. So, Pichet. All right. Anyway, Dan Pichet's here. And I will not talk about how you love Razzles, I promise. And what I will talk about is IPAs. In fact, on our outline, I just said, let's talk about IPA. A few things that it's funny, about a year ago or a little more, Ray Daniels of the Cicerone program and many other things prior to that was on here talking about how he was there you go. He was concerned for the day when people would just come up and just say, give me your IPA, or IPA would just be a ubiquitous thing. And I don't think we're there, but I have noticed other things, and I wanted to get your guys' opinions on it, and or lack thereof, which is always kind of interesting. So I just wanted to talk about IPAs, I think, dominance of them as a style, at least here in the U.S. Keith, you may, I don't know what they're in Thailand, how popular they are in Singapore.
Non-existent that I've seen.
Yeah.
You can find in the place just a couple doors from down from me was a cafe that had Deschutes beer, and my friend Carrie is a rep for Deschutes, and she said, can you look at the bottle and get the code? I got the code, and she was just shocked that they still had this in the shelf.
That's awesome.
It's
cool that she asked.
Yeah,
too.
There's a Belgian beer cafe there, and Belgian beer cafes are in a lot of different places around the world.
Very stable beers. It makes sense.
Yep, and they're trying to get these various communities to embrace differentiated beer, but I think more or less they serve the tourist market rather than the local market.
Yeah. Well, they're very popular here, and I've noticed that, and this is definitely anecdotal, but that more and more beers are being labeled as IPAs, and I have started to just kind of wonder if I don't know, is the style being stretched? I've had, there's brewed IPAs, there's fruited IPAs, there's sour IPAs, there's fruited sour IPAs, there's a whole bunch of different types of IPAs, and I've been having them lately, and some of them I think these would not be considered IPAs. I think certainly classically. And not that I think they would be considered other types of beer. I just want to make it clear. It's not that I don't think it's a new style, and that a juicy IPA isn't an IPA because it doesn't conform to BJCP style guidelines. It's like, oh no, this tastes more like a Belgian Pale Ale to me. This tastes like a Saison to me. This tastes like a American fruit beer or American fruit ale to me. So then I just, to me, it seems like, oh, they're just tacking on IPA for, whatever reason it is. And again, this is just my very scorching hot take on this. But
I don't think it's a scorching hot take. I mean, I think that trend started several years back. I mean, even I think it's been close to 5 years since I was at Hopleaf. And one of the last beers I tasted before I left was a new brewer. He brought me the beer. He said, this is a double IPA Saison. Like, okay, it was a double Saison or an Imperial Saison IPA. And I tasted it, and there was virtually no bitterness. There weren't tremendous hop characteristics or anything. And I said, okay, I see where you're getting the Imperial Saison part of this, because it was still, kind of grassy and earthy, and had a little bit of a haze to it. Like, definitely an Imperial Saison, if that's a thing. But where's the IPA? Because you don't have any kind of American hops in here. There's no bitter finish. And the brewer, the gentleman, literally said to me, well, I call it whatever I want. I'm like, well, yeah, you can absolutely call it whatever you want, but people are going to expect. He literally said to me, it's America. I can call it whatever I want. And with as much humility as I could possibly muster, I said, well, you're absolutely correct. I am the beverage director at one of the top beer bars in the country, and I consult on this kind of thing. I am legitimately just trying to help you here, since you're new to the industry and I'm not. And the only point I was trying to make to him in that point was, if you put IPA on there, then your consumer has a certain expectation. And when that expectation isn't met, it doesn't matter whether the beer is good or bad. You just didn't meet an expectation. And now I don't think that you know how to brew because you named it wrong. And
How about this
that's
idea?
where I think Ray Daniels is starting to say it's becoming so ubiquitous that I literally saw a TV show when you said our people are just going to ask for IPA. I was watching a sitcom. I don't even remember what it was. And a young lady walked up the bar and just said, "Hey, just give me an IPA." And my wife looks over at me because my head dropped. I'm like, no. I'm like, which one? They probably have 20.
Well, that's super geeky, but it's funny. Like to the writers, they were talking like, "Oh, we need to show that this chick,
Exactly.
this girl is
She's into it
she's into it, and she knows what's what." And,
because IPAs are in. So
right.
You got to be
So,
into it.
so give me an IPA. It's like give me a light, Bud Light.
Yeah.
Which most of our listeners probably don't know what
I
that
remember
means. But so what about this though? Do you think it could potentially be the? Well, I mean, guys, jump in. Sometimes, Doug, you have a tendency to wait to be called on. So just shout stuff out if you there's anything you want to say, because I don't want to miss any insights that you have. So, do you think it could be that the shifting center of IPA is away from bitterness? You were saying, there was no bitterness in this double saison, imperial saison IPA. You said there was no bitterness. Bitterness I think is really down overall in IPAs and in the kind of like emerging styles or trending styles. It's often non-existent. And does that open it up to be, well, it used to be bitterness is what makes an IPA, like one of the main things. But if it's not that anymore, if it's this tropical flavor that people now associate with IPAs, well, I can do that with a fruit beer too, and it's got a tiny bit of tartness. So now it's a sour fruit IPA. But when you drink it, you're like, oh, this is like what a brew pub would call their fruit beer. But if you call it an IPA, do guys order it more? That's the other thing I was curious about.
I have to assume they're going to. I mean, when it comes down to it, marketing is marketing.
Yeah.
And big brands wouldn't start calling things IPA if it didn't make sales sense. And I mean, to me, it makes perfect sense for the beers to start getting a little bit less bitter as the number of beer drinkers increases in America. I've often said, and when I teach beer, one of the biggest ironies, I think, when it comes to IPAs and beer is that Americans hate the word bitter, but seem to be in love with bitter. It's like if you call something a bitter, an English beer, and you call it a bitter on your menu, it won't sell.
Right.
But if you just call it a nutty malty English beer, all of a sudden, no problem. So it makes sense that that beers would start being less bitter, because bitter also is poison. That's why humans don't automatically like bitter. It's an acquired taste, just like the Europeans took a while to like the amount of hops we put in stuff. But now, I think that's where we're going, that marketing is an IPA, and that's where I said to this gentleman, I'm like, it's cool to put IPA on there if you want to sell your beer, and you'll sell the first one. You're not going to sell the second one. And that's where it's at. It's like, I do believe, call your beer what you want to call it. Put whatever kind of crazy stuff you want in it. I drank a beer that was made from the yeast propagated out of a dude's beard.
There's a beer sitting about a foot from you that has lichen and mushrooms in it. Yeah.
So, I say drink what you want, call it what you want, but you have to understand that sometimes that marketing can backfire on you, because then you don't sell the second one. Or eventually IPA will be so ubiquitous to anything, all of a sudden, instead of calling something an American Pale Ale, it's going to be an IPA Pale Ale, because the A is going to stand for American.
Right.
Instead of ale.
How we've moved over to using IPA is like we're just modifying IPAs in a lot of different ways, just to latch on to that idea. This is an IPA. Here's the idea of what this beer is. And it's moved quite a bit away, I think, from what guys like Martin Cornell and Ron Pattinson, is it?
The English beer writers.
And Randy Mosier. I mean, if you look at those guys, Mosier points out that with Martin and Ron, that he says, if I want to read anything on beer history, I read these guys. Ron Pattinson's going to the old breweries in the UK and digging up their recipes from hundreds of years ago. I was in the brewer's office, John Keeling, the head brewer for Fuller's, and they have handwritten books that date back like 150, 200 years. So we know what an IPA was. And the original idea of an American IPA, I don't know if you would agree, is that it evolved by homebrewers to use American hops and was uniquely higher in alcohol, with a preconception that in order for these beer to last from London and Burton all the way to India, that you had to have higher hop resistance to disease, and the alcohol also acted as a preservative. Now, listen.
And for people out there, very quickly, the hops are a antimicrobial,
correct,
essentially, so they would hop them. So
yeah, and because they were shipped in wooden barrels, even though they were pitch lined, inherently had a degree of exposure, cracks and fissures and stuff like that. So if you had a potential beer spoiler in these barrels, then having higher alcohol and having higher amounts of hops inside these barrels, as these made their way over the long trip to India, they would last and still be drinkable. Well, when we brought them into the United States, especially homebrewers, I think were the guys in the 1970s and 80s that resurrected the idea of the India Pale Ale. And from that point, we really had an English Pale IPA and an American IPA. But then...
And even before that, I think they were probably just reading about them, being like, oh, Pale Ale's more heavily hopped. I don't think they were using these brewing texts. These guys, there was no internet. These guys were probably just winging it and kind of making what they thought would be an IPA.
They knew it would last longer, but they didn't know why. Right? I mean, you didn't even really have the capacity in the late 1700s of looking at these things under a microscope and saying, oh, that's Lactobacillus brevis. No, you just knew that you added a handful to that. And so getting back to the original idea of IPA, we're kind of bastardizing the actual phrase IPA. Why can't we just say that this is a New England ale instead of a New England IPA? Because some of the New England IPAs I've had have minimal bitterness to them. It makes them fantastically drinkable. That idea of fruity, juicy orange peel, grapefruit peel. I mean, it's marvelous. And when you lack that degree of bitterness, it does make for a more drinkable, accessible, refreshing beer on a cold day. But without the bitterness, how is that an IPA?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, again, the styles are probably, the New England IPA is probably as different from the West Coast IPA as a West Coast IPA was from whatever was being made at Burton on Trent.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the style is always kind of moving around. And ultimately, I'm sure breweries care much less about historical... even recent historical taste profile and BJCP and BA guidelines than they do about what sells, as was probably the original Burton on Trent brewers as well. That's probably always what's driven the styles to shift around. But it is interesting. I think we're at a point where, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but you could see the beginnings if it were to go in this direction where, I don't even know what IPA would mean. I mean, I have beers that are not, I've drank beers that are just not distinguishable as an IPA from what I know it. And these juicy, fruity, and New England style IPAs, I still get what they're talking about because it's intense hop aroma and flavor. And some of these beers, I don't even think have that.
Do those tend to be all small local breweries, or is this happening? So,
Yes.
So you're not talking about the top 10 in size craft breweries here.
Sorry,
you're talking
that's a fair. That's something that is worth
Well, that just affects how I would respond because
clarifying,
I was curious. Okay.
Yeah,
so
no, it's
the small.
it's
okay.
little guys, but I think those are the ones who also tend to drive these trends.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I wanted to say, like my thought is, the reason I think we have, coming up on 7,000 breweries right now is two things: IPA and the fact that the biggest breweries, macro and the biggest craft breweries, took a long time to react and make their own, and they allowed that period of 2010 to 2014 or 15. They allowed all these small breweries to pop up, gain distribution, and kind of set the mark for the style. And then now that they are catching up, now that they are armed, whenever I hear what's going to be the next IPA, I don't think there will be a next anything like it ever again, because the largest breweries in the world are now have the armies to react quicker. But now when we're talking about IPA now, I think a lot of this variation of the style that you're pointing out is because of a need to differentiate from all of the kind of well-executed but kind of, basic IPAs as we originally got to know them that are out there now from the larger breweries. Now the smaller breweries are kind of forced to innovate within, and because of that, we're getting things that we are calling into question whether this is actually an IPA or not. But there's kind of that need to, one, be different, to kind of validate why these need to cost more, but also just looking around, cost aside, and looking at 7,000 other breweries and saying, oh, we need to do something different. We need to do something a little bit outrageous. So we, as a result, we now have these weird IPAs that we're saying don't even taste like IPAs, but they do feel the need to call them that.
Right.
So that they sell.
Yeah. So that they sell.
Yes.
Exactly. And it's interesting. You kind of answered the other half of what I was going to talk about, which was, to me, it seems, well, to me, it's quite clear. I mean, the flavor profiles of IPAs, with what I just said aside, where you've got these small segment of kind of these radicalized IPAs or whatever you want to call them, but the vast bulk, 99.9% of IPAs, I think the flavor profiles also seem to be coming in line. Has anyone else noticed this? It's everything is tropical, fruity, and juicy. The resiny, the woody, the piney,
earthy,
the dank. That's all. Dank's still kind of
the
hanging
exception
around
because it's a cool name. But
The tropical stuff, I think, is a reflection as well, though, as to hop research that's been done over the last 20 years, that not only in the United States but also in Germany, the Czech Republic, really throughout Europe, they discovered that they could create hops that they could sell to American craft brewers, and that we were looking for differentiated ideas that could be contributed to beer without using specialized ingredients, just by using hops. So now when you go to the brewing conferences and you see all the hop distributors, what they're showcasing, what they're putting on their tables is everything that has a citrus aromatic to it, and getting away from the idea of herbaceous, because herbaceous is difficult, I think, for young people to understand unless you cook. Unless you cook, you really don't know what the telltale aromatics and flavors are of different herbs. In fact, I think herbs would probably smell medicinal to a lot of younger people, whereas you get tropical fruit, mango, papaya, pineapple. Kids know that, and it is young people that drive, to a large extent, the experimental consumption market.
I tend to think that people like to be able to identify things as well. I think it engages them and excites them. To one, be able to know what something is, what a flavor is being derived from, oh, that's the hops, I like it, and then to be able to say, oh, that tastes like something I know, that tastes like mango, versus that tastes like Noble hops.
Right.
Which I think, most of us, if not all of us, would know what Noble hop character is, but it's just because we've probably drank enough of them where someone's like, that what you're tasting right there, that's noble hop character. So it's easy just to be like, wow, this tastes like, key lime pie and mango and stuff like that.
It's no longer about how good of an IPA it is. It's how much did it taste like key lime pie? How much did it remind me of eating key lime pie? That's what determines how many bottle caps it gets.
Look at, you mentioned key lime pie. Randy Mosier's, one of his favorite pairings is key lime pie and Sriracha Ace from Brooklyn. And there's something about the aromatic of that hop that you really pick up, that lime characteristic to it. But now let's look at something that's, melon aromatic hop. If you're bidding for those hops right now for forward contracting, you're paying an absolute fortune for them.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily know if you're doing the right thing, because those melon hops, by the time you're going to buy them 2 years from now, they could be absolutely everywhere. So you paid too much for them. You don't want to overbid in a contract. So instead, you bid for some amount of a melon flavored hop, but then you create a beer that you go, I could also use melon extract in this, which can be substantially less in cost and much more predictable. And the company Amaretti, if you haven't heard of them as a home brewer, or especially as a commercial brewer, that's pretty unusual, because Amaretti is just slamming the brewing community with information about all their fruit and spice essences that you can use in beer and other products.
Yep.
So you can use these things in controllable additions, not only to beer and tank, but as dosing into finished beer, going into a bright tank or into package, and get precisely the flavor and aromatic characteristics you want. You can't guarantee that with hops. They're agricultural ingredients that change year after year.
So do you see a trend going that way? Is getting these interesting exotic flavors from manufactured extracts rather than from the hops? You're shaking your head.
Yeah. Well, the Amaretti is a company. When you say manufactured extracts, they are manufactured in such a way as to be quite natural. Even the carrier medium that they use to keep the stuff suspended when you buy it will be, of course, 100% edible oils and food-based products, because they've been supplying the food industry and especially the baking industry for bakeries that do fancy cakes and stuff like that need flavor.
Sure, I didn't mean to say that it was a whole bunch of chemicals and stuff.
But they're natural products. And I think in the past, let's say 15 years ago, if you said, "Oh, I'm going to use a fruit puree instead of stuff that's straight from the farmer's market," purists would probably go, you should be using like regular fruit, whole fruit, and just mash it yourself. Even a puree or an extract is just not what makes craft beer. I think we are moving away from that, and there are natural ways of extracting these things in the same way that we're using more in the way of hop bittering extract and hop oil extracts instead of using the hops themselves, because as we mentioned a little bit earlier, that by the time you put a ton of hops in to extract a large amount of aromatics, the waste and cost factor is just extraordinary. Mm-hmm. And some of the best brewers across the United States have. Drew, as you mentioned, that beers have gotten less bitter to some extent. I think to some extent what they are is less astringent as well, because brewers have learned over the last decade that when you dry hop, you pull astringency out, you pull bitterness out. So moving into extracts of all different sorts that we can add to beer creates a more controllable product.
Now, one of the big focuses that you put on, that you just mentioned, Keith, was the quality of and the natural essence of the extract. Do you, I don't know, do you, Doug, think that the quality of the extract is really important to the consumer in the end flavor? Do you think that that matters? I don't know. I'm thinking of like pancake beers, but that might just be a tiny, small.
Yeah, I don't know as much about that.
No,
I was thinking hop extracts.
Talk about hop extracts.
We've just been playing around with more cryo hops and really liking the flavors you get out of that. And then there's an in-between kind of hop you can use. Like for Citra, we got some. We have Citra hops. There's Citra Cryo, and then there's something in between that's a type of Citra that just has like less of the stem and more, but it's not all the way to the like dust level of
like shake.
Cryo.
It's just shake, not dust.
And we're just loving the extra flavor we're getting by using those. in the brew house, as opposed to, the old method of just, using pellets. But that's what I was nodding at.
Okay.
Not artificial.
I think it's probably a good time for me to mention to you, yes, Serge, I won't forget. Tell everyone that they're listening to WLPN LP Chicago 105.5 FM Chicago, a.k.a. Lumpen Radio. And I'll buy some time while producer Serge gets into his DJ Serge outfit. He's putting on a tracksuit and some yellow lensed glasses. Okay, he's ready. And he is now DJ Serge. He's going to take over for the next 10 minutes or so, put on some tunes for you, and then we will come back with more talk from the Beer Temple Insiders Roundtable. Welcome back to the Beer Temple Insiders Roundtable. Thank you for the lovely tunes, DJ Serge, and welcome back, producer Serge, and welcome back my esteemed guests, Mr. Doug Valicki, Keith Lemke, Drew Larson, and Dan Pichet. And it's been a bit, it's been a minute, but it's time for a handwritten letter, and in my best Ira Glass voice, I will say I have in my hand a letter. I'm going to make it crinkle around. So for those of you who haven't been listening for a while, we love hearing from you guys, really about anything. It can be questions you have or responses to stuff we've talked about in the past. And if you want to send that, the easiest way is to send it to insiders@craftbeertemple.com. But if you want to ensure it's going to be read, you can write a handwritten letter, which is what happened this week. And if you want to do that, this person sent it to the Beer Temple, which, in all honesty, it's more likely to get in my hands. A bunch have been getting lost here at the Cope Prosperity Sphere. One just surfaced from a year ago. That was mailed a year ago. That was just handed to me last week, but more on that later. So just send it to the Beer Temple, Beer Temple Insiders Roundtable. Attention, Chris Quinn, or you can send it to King Kona if you prefer. 3173 North Elston Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, 60618, which, without anyone saying anything, the writer of this letter did that. Probably a good idea because it ended up in my hands within days. This is from Brad, and he wrote this, and now you guys haven't prepped on it, my panel members, but I think you guys can kind of fill in on it. Dear Chris et al., I'm writing to thank and applaud you for discussing mental health and overconsumption on episode 138 of the Beer Temple Insiders Roundtable. I've always detected an uneasy, unspoken current beneath our high-blown talk of craft, of a kind of adolescent party bro sensibility, even if we always like to think of ourselves as different, parentheses usually better, than those corporate beer drinkers. But even if it's not fun, it's always important to talk about health, be it brewery staff or consumers. I guess I have two questions coming out of this. One, do you anticipate some, quote, self-regulation, end quote, by craft brewers along the lines of Big Beer's Drink Responsibly programs? Do you think that would be a good direction for craft beer? Two, will the rise of weed water, cannabis-infused hop water, feed the side of the industry that seeks the buzz or the high as much as maybe or more than flavor? Or will we see more fragmentation of craft consumers, interpret fragmentation how you will, or maybe cannabis drinks will just take their place among the options for the promiscuous millennial drinker. Love your show and the work you're doing. Cheers, Brad F. Brad, I can't pronounce that. Fruhoff, I think, beer, writer, editor, ghost, co-host, 2 beers, and a podcast. So thank you very much, Brad, for the letter. And yeah, this was something that stemmed from an interview that Sean Hill from Hill Farmstead gave about what he saw as, I think, a lack of any sort of mentioning about it. And it is kind of, I'm saying this tongue-in-cheek, it is a bit of a buzzkill to talk about this sort of thing, but it is legit. I mean, this is a addictive substance that people are talking about. And I tend to agree that there definitely is as Brad put it, what did he call it, a party bro aspect to it that I've never felt comfortable with personally. I don't like it. That doesn't mean that is not reality of what why people drink beer, because it is alcoholic. But yeah. So I just wanted to see if there was any response to that. I guess his 2 questions were, do you anticipate any self-regulation by craft brewers along the lines of the Drink Responsible program? And also, do you think that, in the words of Brad, Weedwater will feed the party bro aspect, or the party bro side of people who are drinking craft beer in particular?
Yeah, I think one was a great letter in the sense that it brought up a couple of really phenomenal points. My undergrad, my background's exercise physiology. I was with the Army Medical Department for 22 years. So the idea of health with all this is a big deal. When I teach beer, one of the first things I say is, like, let's be honest with each other. People drink beer, they get drunk. There's a social relaxation to it. It makes you feel good. That's the truth of it. It's one of the biggest reasons people drink.
Social lubricant.
Lubricant. It is, like it or not. And to some extent, there are some health benefits behind it. But the very next statement is, this is very definitely a bell curve, where you go up and you're friendly and there's a little bit of a health benefit, and then it goes down very quickly and hard down. And from there. And, recently in my own life, I've actually started looking at my own health, and I've been drinking a lot less. And honestly, I am
from a caloric standpoint, or from a concern of addiction standpoint.
It's not a concern with addiction, because it's not a trait I've got.
Yeah.
The amount of beer for the amount of time I've drank in my life, the fact that I can still walk away from it if I feel like it, I feel like I missed that one.
Yeah.
So that's good. But still, from a caloric standpoint, from drinking 3 or 4 beers before bed, which won't, at this point, if I'm drinking a 4% beer and I drink 3 or 4 of them in 4 hours before bed, I'm not drunk, but it definitely changes how I sleep and when I wake up. And the thing that struck me in that letter is, I was thinking to myself, when he talked about a bro, party kind of thing, is that I'm thinking to myself, I was just, I was talking to Keith before the show, talking about, I don't even drink that much beer. I rarely drink beer at home anymore. I almost only drink beer when I'm out at bars or at accounts and things. I'm like, yet I make jokes all the time on my social media about, what beer I'm going to have at 6 a.m. or with my plate of eggs and whatnot, that part of my persona is somebody who's always drinking. And as he said that, I thought to myself,
someone who doesn't know you and just sees that side
exactly.
of you, yeah.
So somebody who doesn't really know me just sees me always talking about, drinking beer or this or that or the next thing, or, there's way too much blood in my alcohol system. The funny thing is, I'm probably very rarely over 0.08 because I don't like being out of control. And as he was saying that, I just started thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm actually part of the thing that drives that kind of bro atmosphere. I don't think that the craft beer industry has the kind of money that it would take for a huge program. I think the key there is for places, like I love tasting rooms, tap rooms who limit you. Like, hey, this is a tasting room. It's 3 beers. That's it. This isn't a place to come and get drunk. Places who have on their menus, drink responsibly, hey, here's the phone number to Uber if you don't have the app. I don't think there's a phone number. I'm just saying.
Yeah, right.
But I think that's where it can come down to, because the truth of the matter is, and, if anybody from one of the big macro companies wants to give me a multi-million-dollar salary, please forget that I said this. But I'd be willing to bet that the majority of craft brewers care a lot more about the health and safety of their patrons than the big macro brewers. And it doesn't come from a huge outreach program. It just comes from owners and bartenders knowing their client base.
Knowing their customers.
Yeah. I mean, I've never seen somebody walk out of your place inebriated to the point where they can't get themselves a cab or anything else. And it's because your staff knows their customers and knows when it's been enough.
I do think it's more of a rarity in just if you look at the retail side of things, your location. It's more of a rarity for people to get really drunk in craft-oriented establishments, whether that's a brew pub, brewery with a tasting room, or really anybody that's got an on-premise consumption facility and sort of. I asked Mike, who was a new employee at Goose Clybourne, a manager there who came from Deschutes Brew Pub in downtown Portland, and he'd worked in a variety of different brew pubs. I asked him given his background, I asked him, when was the last time a cop was called to your establishment because of an unruly customer? He said, I can't remember. I've never had that.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And when you establish a craft beer-oriented location in almost any community, it tends to bring in people who are more responsible drinkers. And people say, because it's more expensive to drink per measure than it would be if you're going to a place that's got $2 PBRs. I'll give you that to some extent.
They're going for experience, not for booze.
Exactly.
I see both.
Both.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
and
I see both.
We're consuming.
I'm not going to lie. And I've seen it more now that we've expanded, and I get to see it day in and day out.
But the predicate of by the way, that looks like very good calligraphy.
Yeah, it does. It's really well handwritten.
And that's in cursive, right?
Yeah, it is.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much. The predicate of this is what's happening within the beer industry. And I think the question, are we being responsible enough for policing our own community? Brewers, brewery sales representatives, distributor sales representatives, everybody involved in the production and sales chain of beer to retailers. And I have seen, when you go to, if you've ever been behind the scenes at any of the beer festivals, where we have the VIP room and the head brewers and the salespeople are there with a whole bunch of beer for them to consume that is better than what the kids on the floor are drinking, you do see a lot of people over-consuming. And there's something within the beer production and sales side of this equation in which I do see that we are drinking more than the average consumer probably does. But it's not just beer. It's wine, it's distillates, and it's the restaurant and bar sector. Bartenders and servers tend to hang around with each other because they work late hours. Sometimes you're working until 1 o'clock in the morning. So you're going to a bar that's got hospitality industry discounts and you're hanging out with people all night. Almost all of my friends are involved in the alcohol sector. And it's endemic that when you deal with alcohol, you're probably going to consume more and maybe binge consume more than the average person.
My dad says if you hang out at a barber shop all the time, eventually you're going to get a haircut.
Not me, man.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you actually take on a culture that works around alcohol all the time? And, as Drew points out that, when you post stuff on Facebook and everything you post is, half the things you post regard having a great beer someplace. For me, 80% of what I post is about having a great beer someplace. So people naturally assume I drink more than I do. But I do drink more than the average person would probably drink. I have to monitor that, and I had to stand in front of groups of students, class after class, hundreds if not thousands per year, and say, you know what? You will have a very short shelf life in this industry if you're always coming into work hungover. If your performance is compromised by being hungover or not showing up at all, that's a huge issue. If you're getting drunk at beer festivals, when you're pouring beer for people coming up to the stand and you've got a pint behind the table and you're killing a pint every half hour, chances are by the end of the night, you're not going to do a great job representing your company. This is an issue, and it's going to continue to be an issue. All we can do is talk about it with our coworkers and say, it needs to be self-policing. But we do need to talk about it.
I think some, too, with self-policing comes down to appropriate serving. I walked into a bar, South Illinois, and this was a bar who just did $6 pints. Regardless of what it was, they only had one glass, a pint glass, and every drink was $6. Somebody gave them a 6th barrel of Dogfish 120. Guess what I saw?
Yeah, that's not okay.
A $6 pint of Dogfish 120. Well, that's a pint of 19% beer. So imagine me pouring you a pint and a half of a high alcohol wine and saying, go ahead and put this down, because that's how much alcohol you're putting down there. That's not responsible.
I mean, that's almost, you're talking about serving 2/3 of a bottle of wine for $6 in a what is considered a single serving glass. Not considered, is a single serving glass.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
a big part of it when I'm working with new establishments, I talk about responsible serving. Part of responsible serving and good business is, hey, if you have that Dogfish 120 or you have a barrel of CBS or something like that, you sell it at 4 to 6 ounces a piece for the same amount of money. So now you're not only making more money, but you're also serving your customers more responsibility. And I think that's taking care of your customers too. And it lets them taste other things. So I think it's not an intentional way of worrying about health, but there's something I think there. I don't know. Maybe I'm stretching.
I have a question for you, Dan. I wanted to see what your take was. How do razzles? Never mind. How are razzles affected by the drink responsibility campaign?
No, I think of it more in the capacity of, interesting beers, scarcity, hard to find, exclusive, and that for people who are interested in whatever the new thing is or whatever the next pastry set is or whatever you want to joke about, that there's something for the people who have that obsessive compulsive tendency, and I do. I know I do. Like, you don't get as deep into some things as you do without having something that's pushing you further. And when the opportunity comes to try something new, followed by the next thing, followed by the next thing, followed by the next thing, it's easy to see how the rabbit hole just goes down. And it's, wow, I've never got to try this or this or this or this or this. And it can happen quickly. It's happened to me.
You see it at fests. You see it at festivals.
Especially.
You see people who are, just blackout drunk or
Sure.
just absolutely passed out at public gatherings.
Yeah.
Just like
we were
out.
we were talking about Fobab during the break. It is a festival of rare, effectively barrel-aged, absurdly high alcohol content beers that you are going to get one shot potentially in your life to ever try this. And we're scratching our heads over this. This is what the event is built on. And not every, the vast majority of people there are to
Fair
try.
point, yeah.
But come on. It isn't like the Hellas Festival.
Right.
Right? This isn't, you're not bringing people in with the day drinker, the daily drinker kind of
Right.
Pilsner. You're bringing people in on the idea and charging for it. The Voodoo Festival I went to was $135.
Right.
It's the most expensive festival I've been to. Mm-hmm. You charge somebody $135 who's into rare barrel-aged beers or rare beer in general, whatever it is, a good beer, but it doesn't matter if it's rare.
Yeah.
and then it's like, oh, I got to get my money's worth. Like now you're putting like the economic factor on it. We're like, I don't want to dump this. I don't want to waste it. I got to get my money's worth.
They don't want to be asked, did you try that? They don't want to be like, no, I wanted to, keep my
Right.
ABV in check.
Exactly.
That's not
I mean,
gonna
it's-
happen. Like,
Now, I tend to think that in your instance, I think that is absolutely 100% fair and accurate, that beer, that festival is built around over consumption. I think it is part of what's kind of built into attending that festival as it
Sure.
is intended to be attended. Now, what I will say is it's also meant to be an anomaly, and I'm not being an apologist for FOBAB at all. I tend to believe in the idea of everything in moderation, including moderation, that having fun like that, if you're responsible, I think you can overconsume responsibly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, let's compare FOBAB to Festival of Farmhouse Ales.
Okay.
I don't have the stats on it; they don't exist. But where is the overconsumption worse?
Yeah, I've never been to FOFA.
It's you're talking like, say, the average farmhouse is 6 to 7% alcohol versus something that you go to a barrel aged festival. I mean, the average beer there is north of 10,
right
on
And there's
average.
probably a lot of sour beers too, which
Sure.
are harder to kind of stomach.
Yeah,
that
and you
way.
can have a little bit of those, but I mean, the thing with the pastry stouts is like, there is no barrier drinking that thing. There is, you have a sour. I can't drink a 750 of sour. I mean, that's what we're drinking right now. I can't do it. Just won't happen. I can put down a bottle of bourbon, a 22-ounce bottle of bourbon county, no problem. Mm-hmm. And I mean, operate heavy equipment. I mean, it's not like I'm sleeping. Whereas I can remember, like, the first time I had bourbon county, I mean, how many years ago? I fell asleep. After my first, I mean, it was in 2011, I think. And now a 22-ounce of a cycle stout, or is a Sunday night.
Now,
I allow myself
that be-
one. I'm trying to regulate on a caloric scale. I'm not driving.
Right.
I'm not leaving my house.
right.
But I'm very conscious. And it's like we've all had our experiences. We've all known people. I mean, this past March was a 10-year anniversary of my friend passing away in a drunk driving accident. And I was visiting my parents this week. He grew up down the street from me, and I saw his dad. And I mean, we've all had painful reminders, and that is it. And we can joke about like the party mentality, but I mean, rosé all day is a thing, right?
Right.
I mean, I have seen napkins, T-shirts, like rosé all day, ha 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 ha. Like rosé is
Overconsumption.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more than just craft. I mean, it's our culture, for God's sakes. I mean, that's we can go down that route, but like consumption is part of it, and it's not just within the industry. And there's nothing you're going to do. There's no campaign. There's no sticker, slogan, ad, whatever that's going to. Oh, you're right. I shouldn't do this.
There could maybe be a pump. I think some of those big things are a little bit of a pump the brakes.
They can,
They
but
can be
for the
because,
people who are
like,
blacking out at
a
FOBAB.
check. Well,
I mean, seriously, like the people who are over-consuming themselves at FOBAB, you can have signs everywhere. It's not changing it for a segment of the population. For the majority of people, but the majority of people there aren't going to black
I also
out.
think that's a rosé all day and a party person atmosphere, or just like this, the lifestyle branding of what bar and alcohol culture is, and a once a year lotteried ticketed event, I think, are a little different. And I'm not saying that that's not going to change.
Yeah, I'm not.
things.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not dumping on FOBAB. Like, I think it's just that it's not just unique to beer. It's not just unique to a segment of
I
it.
agree.
Like the through lines run through. I mean, I'm not familiar with cannabis culture, for instance, but I mean, getting stoned is not enjoying responsibly. Right? It's not just related to alcohol. It's not just related to beer. I mean, it will go through. I mean, look at
about
eating.
getting
Look at
messed
food.
up.
Look at. I mean,
Being gluttonous.
Yeah, it's more than just that. And I mean, I know I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but
Go.
it's a bigger picture. And if you're looking to get wrecked on craft beer, I mean, there's far more efficient ways of doing it.
Right.
One area I can relate is, I'm the gatekeeper of our of Revolution's social media. So with 180 employees,
Yeah,
I'm
very
getting
interested to hear about.
I'm
that.
getting
Yeah.
pitched every day on ideas, and sometimes the best ideas for a social media post or the way to talk about something we're doing comes from someone outside my team. But you're also going to get ideas like, hey, we're doing barrel-aged beers in cans this year. Are we going to show somebody shotgunning
one? Right,
one? And
right,
it's like,
right.
no. So I say no to things like that from people that are just being funny or
Yep.
don't have bad intentions, but you do have to, have a lot of control over that. And, we're very organized. There's a lot of breweries that maybe have multiple people who can post at will on their social media that might not be thinking as much about that and might post something like that
Yeah.
that encourages it. And not doing so isn't going to necessarily stop the behavior, but it can,
No.
by doing that, you're at least not contributing to it.
Yeah.
And so that's
We do
one
the same thing. There was the shotgun
Yeah.
challenge that we were invited to multiple times 2 years ago or something, and people asked if we were going to do it internally.
Yeah.
And I just didn't feel comfortable having a bunch of people that sell alcohol to other people standing around and blatant. I mean, and it's a fun thing. I get it, but I just didn't feel comfortable.
You just don't want to encourage it.
I just
Yeah,
didn't
it's-
feel comfortable. And I've said it before. It might, have something to do with my old man, who's, recovering alcoholic. But I'm very conscious of just the nature of that. And obviously, I'm drinking beer here, and I've overindulged and probably drank irresponsibly plenty of times myself, and responsibly. But yeah, it's interesting, Dan. I hadn't really. I mean, I guess you do think about it, but you don't. But I guess overconsumption is just a part of what is pushed on us all the time about pretty much everything.
I stopped-
not even consuming, just buying. Just
When you talk
everything.
about the overconsumption, I almost want to go deep state with this. I talk about this all the time because, for example, I have a niece getting ready to go to college, and I've been saying this thing for a long time, is that as an American culture, we set ourselves up for tremendous failure with alcohol. I lived in Germany for 3 years, and I used to see German teenagers looking at American teenagers who were able to get alcohol, just acting fools on the public transit and everything else. And you see these German kids just going, what's wrong with Americans and alcohol? So we raise our kids in an environment where alcohol is absolutely taboo. Can't touch it, can't have it. If you, as a parent, let your child, let's say your child is 13, and somebody saw her take a sip of wine at a table, somebody would call the cops on you or think you were a terrible parent. I look at that and I go, you're teaching the child about alcohol and proper consumption or responsible consumption. That's why we have one of the highest alcoholism rates in the world, is because we make it absolutely taboo. And when you talk about kids, we make it absolutely taboo their entire lives, and then we kick them out of the house 3 years before it's still legal for them, and we send them someplace where it's going to be readily available to them with no education or learning from their support structure on how to deal with it. So we literally set ourselves up for absolute failure in this country when it comes to alcohol, because you don't see this
so
type
many
of
levels.
overconsumption in other countries.
So many levels. I in high school, there was a kid who was, always kind of picked on in high school by, this group of friends we had. And then we started drinking underage at parties in high school. And we were probably mimicking what we had seen in 80s and 90s movies of what happens in those things. So we really had no idea what really was happening. And this guy would get obliterated, and we would find that funny. And then he found that way of him being accepted and became a colossal alcoholic. And by the time in his early 20s, he was already a hardened alcoholic. And it was, I remember thinking even back then, and this has a very happy ending. He is does not drink, and he is fine, and he's got a family, and he's doing well. But I remember thinking, even at the time, like, wow, he's doing this out of social pressure. It's crazy and just so deeply messed up.
And, talking about being set up for failure, as I grew up, my father is a very European. He taught German, all that kind of stuff. I remember, as far back as I can remember, he was an old style guy. He'd crack open a can of Old Style, and I had a little shot glass. That was mine. And I'd bring him the shot glass, and he'd fill that shot glass up, and that's what I got. Didn't matter how many beers he was having. I got one shot glass. But that's from as far back as I could remember. And I'll tell you what, when I was in I think I drank twice throughout my entire high school. And because when people were like, oh, my God, we got a six-pack. I'm like, so? I'm like, there's beer in my fridge. If I want some, I can go have it. It's like,
right.
And because it wasn't taboo to me, I didn't care when people snuck it because it's not sneaking it. And I think that makes a huge difference. So, yeah, I feel terrible. I feel terrible for the people when I see a parent like, oh, yeah, here, taste this wine. I see other parents looking at that person. I'm like, that person's actually setting their child up for better than the one who's hiding it.
The two things I hear you and Dan saying are that it's more of a systemic thing, a cultural thing, that a campaign or a sign on the wall is going to like maybe make you feel better that you have this on the wall, but it's not really going to do anything.
It's the prohibition approach. I mean, I think of, when I was starting to drink in high school, that, as a parent, I have young kids now, that when we were kind of in our senior year of high school and actually starting to drink more, and obviously anticipation when we went to college, then it went even further. But we would go to one person's house in a town in the suburbs that will not be named, and the parents took the keys.
The town
stayed
can't
the night.
Even be named. That's how underground it was.
Exactly, and they took the keys and they kept an eye on us, and no one left, and it was contained. And we woke up the next morning and we went home.
Oh.
And the idea of that now, and my business is effectively risk mitigation, is I would never let that happen in my house. Because on the off chance something were to go wrong, I'm done. And at the same time, that sure beat the time that we were drinking in the woods.
In the woods, yeah.
And getting in our cars and driving home. And then, how many kids went to college who, I at least had a year of drinking before I went to college. Whereas I know plenty of people who went, their first drink they had was the first day of freshman orientation.
Right.
And that night was a bad night.
Yeah.
And I mean, just completely being unprepared for it. And we sit here like, wow, I can't believe you're letting your child have a shot glass of beer, and then we have no problem. Just go to college. Best of luck to you. $25,000-$40,000 a year party. Have a good time. Here's a loan. Let's figure this out and hope for the best. I mean, the idea that we can stop it is just absurd. And I mean, I don't want my son thinking of beer as this forbidden object that all of a sudden I turn, when he turns 18 or 19 or when he goes to college, I just turn it back and say, have at it, son.
Right.
Whatever happens, happens.
So you let him have, when you
he's
go
4,
into
it's
10
great.
razzles, you let him do one.
Yes,
Only one.
I let him select the
one
number on his
razzle.
own. The random number generator is his to control, and he's quite good,
Yeah.
by the way.
Right. So doesn't matter how many razzles daddy does, you get one.
Exactly. Yes. And
Okay.
Paw Patrol razzles are kind of what he's on right now.
Okay. That's good.
There's
Training wheels.
something that we're missing as well. And if you were to ask the average American how much has crime increased in the last 30 years, the average American would say, oh, it just continues to go up. When it's absolutely untrue. Crime has continued to go down for the last 30 years in practically every major market. There are little burps, small increases that are short-term, but by and large, it's safer to live. How much more alcohol are we consuming per capita than we were 30 years ago? Less.
Yeah.
We are consuming less alcohol every year. We need to be concerned about that financially in the alcohol industry because this is how we make money. As we in the craft sector fight for a share of people consuming beer, that is a decreasing pie that we are fighting for. So that's come about because there is social pressure. We're not advertising on television that people should be drinking aggressively. Almost every commercial says drink responsibly. There's little in the way of sponsored cultural information from the alcohol media going out to people saying, oh, you should just go out and go nuts and drink excessively. That's still being driven by subcultures, by people wanting to have fun amongst their peer group. That alcohol consumption is going down, I think is actually indicative that things are getting better.
I think you're probably right, and also I do think that the overall, I mean, the concept of drunk driving was so commonplace that I was watching for the first time ever. Is it Twin Peaks, the old TV show? So in like episode 2, and this was from the 90s, right? So it like there was a guy and his friend who, were so drunk. One of them, they were swerving all over the road. One of them was like standing up, wobbling on the hood of his car. Went to his girlfriend's house and was like talking to the parent to try to get them. And the dad saw them like, "You kids been drinking?" High school kids. And they're like, "Yeah, maybe a little bit," And they're like, "All right, well, you guys get on now," and like put him back in the car to drive away. And that would never be allowed on TV. And I mean, there were so many times where it's almost like glorified in the past. So I do think that that's probably something to do with the reduction of drinking, is just people being like, hey, that's not acceptable to do anymore.
And you actually see more people smoking joints on TV nowadays than you do getting drunk.
Yeah, probably getting drunk in a positive way, like, oh, this guy's a party animal, rather than like, this guy, It's funny. Yeah, it's
and
funny.
Sort of you mentioned drink responsibly posters in, at point of sale, whether it's retail or especially in a bar. If you see what's going on in the UK right now, and has been going on for probably about 15 years, 20 years, World Health Organization and the UK government have been putting quite a full court press on socially engineering the amount of alcohol that people consume, to the point where the menus...
What do you mean by that?
Well, the menus will show the amount of alcohol units that the average person should be consuming per day, and that's higher for men than it is for women. There are commercials on with frequency regarding alcohol use, and that, along with the ban of smoking in pubs, has pushed so many former pub enthusiasts into drinking at home. They just don't want to be harangued when they go into these public locations. They don't want to be made to feel guilty, and it's just a lot cheaper to drink at home in the UK. The price of a pint is probably 4 to 5 times higher than an equivalent measure that you can buy to take home. And people are literally, instead of going to pubs, they're just going home and watching their 80-inch projection TVs and watching sports instead of, going out to the pub and having a good time the way they used to. And sure, it was probably over drinking. But in the UK, especially, more use of public transportation. People walk a lot more. But coming, from Vancouver, when I go home, you can be pulled off the road for any level of alcohol in your blood. 0.08 is the statutory limitation. Actually, I think it's down to 0.5 now. But if you get pulled over and you come around the corner and go through a roadblock, which are common in Canada and other nations, they'll make you roll your window down, you blow into the tube. Any level of alcohol, the officer can say, give me your keys, get out, park the car. You have to find your way home. You have to go to court. You have to bill your car out so people don't drink and drive. And that's a way of socially engineering, limiting alcohol consumption. It's not very good for the restaurant owners and for the pub owners. And in Vancouver, they don't have Uber. So for them, it's really causing a lot of upset. When we think about how we can socially engineer alcohol consumption, there are downsides to it as well.
There are downsides to it as well, because also the pub has been typically a very kind of a social town hall, I think, really. I mean, it's one of the places where people who are maybe just acquaintances or even strangers can kind of sit and have a conversation, and it's a social, alcohol is a social lubricant, and just kind of sit and talk to people. And some people enjoy doing that. I mean, I'm one of them.
We wouldn't have an America without a pub. I mean, that's where we
wouldn't have a lot of countries without a pub.
foment our revolution.
That's right. That's true. Well, I think it's time for. First, before I say that, I want to say thank you to Brad for the letter. It certainly spurred a lot of conversation, so I very much appreciate that. If any of you guys want to send a letter to me, it's let's just send it to the Beer Temple again. That's the Beer Temple, 3173 North Elston Avenue. You can also send it to insiders@craftbeertemple.com. Handwritten letters take a lot more effort. They're very much appreciated, and they're very cool when we get them. We've got a mini little inundation with them, so thank you guys so much for that. But don't feel like you need to. Emails are e-letters are fine as well. I forget what I
Chris, do you
them.
collect brewery stickers as well that people could include in the envelope? Just a little.
Yeah, there you go. That's cool, and we'll stick them up at the bar. Good idea, Keith. Thank you. The time has come. We are out of time. We're going to go around. I want to thank my guests, Doug, Keith, Drew, and Dan for coming on, as well as producer/DJ/producer again, Serge, for holding it down yet again. Final words, anything that you guys want to talk about or mention in closing? Anyone want to go first, or should I call on people? You don't have to say anything. There
I'll
you
go
Drew.
first. I remember the last time you asked, hey, what do you want to shout out or say what's going on? And I don't want to say what's going on. What I want to say is, this is an awesome industry. Whether you're an owner, a manager, a server, a buyer, a seller, we're all part of the same team that is this industry. You guys got to work well together and build relationships. If you are a jerk to the people around you, you're going to get the same back. You catch more flies with honey than vinegar. I see so many people just be terrible to each other, terrible to their employees or reps, and vice versa. I'm like, let's all just get along, man.
Do you see that a lot? Do you see people who are just nasty to the other people in the industry with them?
Nobody is ever nasty to each other that are on the same level. I will see, when I got to Hopleaf, it's the first time I ever purchased, and I was lucky to have a few reps who were very friendly with Michael Roper and the location, so I could be more open. One of my first questions was, as a rep, what are the kinds of things that you run into that are difficult in your day? The kinds of things that would make me a better partner as a buyer. And I just got all sorts of stories. Days are always Tuesday when I'm supposed to show up. I have an appointment. I show up, and it turns out the person's not there. And they'll be like, oh, yeah, I took the day off. And nobody said a word. It's, and these reps have to say something along the lines of, oh, I was just in the area. No problem. I can pop in again later. Or reps that are holding back and not showing up and not serving, vice versa. You work together. You have something, whether you're the one writing the check or delivering the beer, both of you have something that the other person wants. Or, one thing that drives me up the wall in this industry, and there's probably going to be a lot of people who hate me now, is leadership is a difficult thing in this industry. And I think it's because a lot of people haven't been formally taught how to lead. And I've got a friend who worked at a place, also won't be named. This is just an amazing one. An employee tapped the wrong keg as the next up, and it happened to be a very expensive reserved keg for something coming up. An email went out to that entire staff from one of the managers saying, there's a mandatory meeting tomorrow morning. This is what happened. If it ever happens again, the cost of that barrel is coming out of everybody's salary, and if you're not here tomorrow morning, you'll be reprimanded for that too. And it's like, well, first of all, what you just said was illegal. And second of all, you haven't mandated that everybody checks their email. So half your staff may not see this and show up tomorrow morning. And third, if you think that's going to build morale in the people who talk to your customers and take their money, guess what? It's not. Like, the people who are taking the money and talking to the customers are the people who should probably be treated the best. And they will treat your customers the best. And unfortunately, I see a lot of the opposite. And so when I hear places all over the city saying to me, Drew, it's just so hard to find good help, sometimes I just want to look right back at them and go, you ever think the help is thinking to themselves, man, it's so hard to find good management?
Yeah, no, it's true.
So
I
be
totally
good
agree.
to your team,
Cool.
and your team will be good back.
Dan, anything you wanted to
Get so
say?
riled up.
Good. That's good.
I think it was an interesting discussion. I didn't have a lot to add on the IPA side, but there's broader picture, broader items at play in the industry beyond just, like I said, a campaign. And we think about how the industry runs. It's based on consumption. So, looking at what the foundation is needs to be evaluated. But I think the landscape is changing. Certainly, I think having Uber is a massive change in
I totally agree.
Being able to go out, enjoy yourself, still get home safely, because too many of us know exactly what happens when you don't.
Keith, anything for you?
Let's see, just something lighter. I was at Revolution Brew Pub last week and had Under Pressure from the Will Turner, one of my favorite brewers and close friend there.
Under protest.
Under Protest, yes, sorry, Under Protest.
You said under pressure, and I was freaked
Under
out because I take
protest.
care of that system.
And yeah, most draft systems should be under pressure. And it was absolutely delicious to the point I ordered a second one, which I almost never do. And just saw as I came in here that Will said there's another beer coming out called Brixton Bitter. If you know Will, you know he does an amazing job of English beer styles, and my ass is going to be all over that beer this weekend.
Cool.
Is there anywhere in town that's going to get a cask of that Brixton Bitter?
Yeah, the Beer Temple will be getting that Brixton
right.
Bitter. We're very excited about it.
I think that's
So-
enough of a plug for
I
me.
have two places to go to this weekend.
All right, then. Well, if that's enough of a plug for you, is it really, Doug? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I wanted to thank everyone. It's been a great show. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We will see you next week with more of the Beer Temple Insiders Roundtable.
Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again. Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again. Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again.